folks. Sorry, it's quite dark in here. Some thoughts regarding the coverage of the floods that are happening in Texas and in Asia. One of the big talking points that's emerged in the last couple of days is this idea that coverage in Western media of the floods is privileging those less affected in Texas than those more affected in somewhere like India, where 40 million people have been impacted by floods, thousands dead, compared to Texas, where we can say that there's a crisis, but the scale is objectively smaller. So there's a sort of rush in some quarters to ascribe an intention to why that coverage is taking place. And I've seen it said and written in a couple of places now that it's part of a sort of Western racist imperial outlook, where we tend to value the lives of our own above the lives of those who live out with our sort of realm of consciousness or our frame of reference. To a certain extent, that's true. What I would argue is that it's a bit dangerous to ascribe intention when we're dealing with massive media organisations in which thousands of people operate. So it's oversimplification of a complicated issue. The second thing is that it's natural for people to show more interest or care more about things that are closer to them, whether that's in physical proximity or cultural proximity. And that would naturally manifest in the news agenda because it's audience that drives it. So there's a reason why you care more if someone in your family gets hurt than someone across the street. There's a reason why it hurts more when someone you know dies than when you see a hearse driving past, when you're walking along outside Tesco one day. You might feel a sort of tinge of sympathy, but it will pass quickly as you return to your immediate concerns. So that's a natural function of your humanity. You're programmed to care more about your tribe and your community because that then gives you a list of priorities that help you survive. And just like the news agenda, that translates culturally. That's why we see ourselves in communities at different levels of scale. So we have our family, then we have our community, then we have our city, then we have our country, then we have our continent. And the reason that the US floods are privileged over the floods in India is because it's for the same reason that the floods in India are privileged in the Asian news agenda over what's happening in America. It's because that's what's happening in their neck of the woods. In the news, as well as being something that informs us, as well as being a sort of propaganda tool, it's also us as a species communicating back to ourselves saying, this is what's going on out there in the world. Here is the information that you need to navigate. Now, you'll get people who'll counter that and say, well, I feel more connected to India. And it's like, okay, we know that in Britain and America there are loads of people of Indian and Asian descent, so we understand that, and we can understand why they would feel connected to these events because they'll have family at home. So we see that. But a lot of the other people are just saying that because it's in the news. How many people, here's a way to prove very quickly how we are more culturally attuned to what's going on in America than we are in India. How many people out there who have an issue with the way Western media is portraying these floods? How many of you followed the Indian elections? How many of you are interested in the personalities and the characters involved in the democratic process in a place like Thailand? Very little. So that proves there that this interest in, or this affinity with people in India is not so much disingenuous, but it's contrived, because it's in the news that we're talking about it. So you see the contradiction there, because the complaint is that it's not in the news, but the only reason we're talking about it is because it's there. And even today, you see actually that the floods in Asia are the top news story on the BBC. So I feel as if, of course, we should be on guard to make sure that certain lives aren't being privileged over others, and that we don't take a kind of high-minded Western imperial approach to things. But I also think it's a bit self-centred of us to think that every single catastrophe in the world must lead back to us in some way. And also, finally, this idea of putting tragedies in some sort of hierarchy, it just leads to... It's just like a house of cards. You'll never ever be able to come to an agreement about what the most important thing is. For example, if you're saying that the floods in India are more important news-wise than the floods in America, then what you're saying is that those deaths are more important. But then someone else could come in and say, well, why are we only talking about floods? What about all the people dying in famines? And then we say, okay, cool, let's integrate that into the conversation as well. Okay, so we're putting all of these floods on an equal playing field, and then we're going to import all of the famine stuff, and we'll get all that in the conversation. Cool. So now we're putting everything on an equal thing. Aye, but what about all the wars? Oh, right, okay, cool, let's import all the discussion about the wars, because all of that's equal. Because why can we say that the floods are more important than the wars? Because they're all happening just now and lots of people are dying, so let's integrate all that into the conversation. And then people say, well, why are we only talking about natural disasters and wars? What about all the people who die of addictions or abuse? And before you know it, like, no matter what you do, someone else can just stick their head in the conversation and say, what about? It becomes a point where you just need to accept the level of complexity at play and understand that the reason that the news agenda here regarding what's regarded as important here is a manifestation of us and what we think's important. That's why we care more about watching Trump than we do about Indian politicians. And so we can't deny that, as much as our skepticism of Western civilization and our belief that the West is a force for tyranny in the world, as much as that can often orientate how we view issues. We also have to say that it's natural that floods in America would be more prominent in the news agenda in America and Britain, and I'm pretty sure that the floods in Asia are more prominent in the news agenda there. Wonder what the rest of you thought. Sorry if that was a bit rambly, and I'll just leave it there. Peace.